Good morning. I'm Ron Levy with the Grumman Owners and Pilots Association. I'm a PFP instructor, and I'm also the former safety director of the GOPA. Getting used to saying GOPA instead of AYA, that's tough. We're going to talk this morning about doing a pre-flight on a Grumman Tiger and the other Grumman airplanes. A couple of things I'd like to say up front on doing pre-flight and walk-around inspection. I don't carry the checklist with me. I have a number of reasons for doing that. First of all, it generally takes two hands to do some of the pre-flight tasks, and then you got no place to put the checklist. And secondly, people tend to stare at the checklist instead of watching the airplane. I had an experience some years ago when I was instructing. We'd been out in a 172 the night before doing instrument work, and the next morning I was doing a VFR private student in the same plane. And as we walked out to the airplane, I noticed that right about here was what looked like a giant bug splat like this, and I saw that from about 50 feet away. Well, I just filed that in my head. The student goes out, gets his paper checklist, and he's walking around the airplane looking at the checklist, looking at that item, looking at the checklist, looking at that item, looking at the checklist, looking at that item. He gets all the way around the airplane and gets back to the pilot's door and says, "Looks like it's good to go." And I said, "What about the bird strike?" "What bird strike?" "This one up here." "Oh my God, I didn't see that." Because he was busy looking at the checklist. So the way that I teach using the checklist on the pre-flight is that before you start the pre-flight, pull out the checklist and go through it. Then do the walk-around. And then go through it again to make sure you checked everything. For some people, what they'll want to do is look at the first section, the wing section or the tail section. Look at the checklist, put the checklist in your pocket, then check it. Then when you're done with that section, run through the checklist again for that section, and then preview the next section, do the section, and then review it. But trying to do the pre-flight inspection with your checklist in your hand is counterproductive. Enough said. So when I get out of the airplane after doing the cockpit checks, first thing that I do is look at the underside of the airplane. Now, this is part of your physical training regimen, because the way I do that is to come down here and look at the belly of the plane. And I'm looking to see what's that coming out of the exhaust and what's coming out of the oil, the sump vent, to see how much oil there is on the belly, how much exhaust there is on the belly. I'm looking for signs of excessive fresh oil. I'm looking for signs of excessive burnt products in the exhaust. Then I'll work coming back along the side. I'm looking for the static port. Don't touch the static port, because you don't want the oils and things on your fingers. Even that little bit of skin oil getting into the static system can clog up the system. So look, but don't touch. Now, being old, age doth make presbyopics of us all, as the Bard of Avon sort of said. And I've got my flashlight handy. I'm going to take a look, make sure that static port is clear. Coming around, we're now going to get into some of the Grumman specific things. The next thing I'm going to look at, in the lightning holes here, to make sure that there's no birds' nests in there. And if you park your plane outside, it's not a matter of if, but when you find some bird nest debris in there. And it's tricky to pull it out. You'll need some kind of device with little claws you can pull things out with. Some people put either aluminum tape over them, which I don't recommend, because now you're encouraging the corrosion. Some people cut screening material and attach that here. That sounds like a good idea. I don't have any problem with birds in my hangar, so I haven't done that. I'll go ahead and get free movement of the elevator, and then I'm going to make a check to see if the elevator is adjusted evenly. I'm lined up here. I'm going to look over at the other side, and I can see that the other side is also even with the stabilizer. Now, what can happen is that over time, the bolts in the tail cone, which hold the elevator mechanism together there, can get a little bit worn, and the bolt holes get elongated, and then you can start to get a mismatch. And it's important to catch this early, because if the bolt holes get too elongated, they can't be repaired. You have to replace the assembly. And repair is a lot cheaper than replace. Coming around to the back side, just again, free movement, making sure that the trim tab is moving freely, as well as the elevator. Now here we get to another spot where I'm going to go ahead and look inside the tail cone. Now, to see this, we'd have to pull the tail cone to really see what I'm looking at. But I'm going to go ahead and look inside, and the flange that holds the elevator assembly has 4 bolts, one in each corner where it attaches to the aft closure bulkhead. You want to look at the flange around those bolt heads for cracks. If you see cracks, you need to ground the plane and get a new flange, because if one of those things breaks, the whole elevator falls off, and then the plane gets really hard to fly.